Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the afternoon keynote of the second day of the CyberX Forum. Wish you all a good November afternoon, and we have a very exciting presentation lined up for you. So just a reminder before I get into the flow of the presentation, I will be taking questions towards the end. So just want to make sure that if you have questions as I'm presenting, please feel free to post them in the Q&A or chat, and I will sort of keep track of those questions, and looking forward to an interactive Q&A session towards the end. So my name is Shiven Ramji. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Auth0. Auth0 is a product unit of Okta. And the topic for today is really thinking of a user-first approach, or exploring a user-first approach to MFA. As a modern-day CISO, your number one priority is to keep your users safe. And achieving this requires you to address the competing needs of security, privacy, and convenience. In the security industry, everybody believed that to be secure, something couldn't be convenient. And security and convenience sort of functioned only in opposition. And so making access hard was sort of the only way, or the best way, to keep you safe. So I want to take you on this journey in this presentation, and we're going to explore ways to deliver a secure experience to your customers without compromising the end user by taking sort of a user-first approach to MFA. Now, this is moving along. Okay, so the plan for the presentation here today is I'll introduce myself a little bit and a little bit of what we do at Auth0 to give you the context of why we're sort of exploring a user-first approach to MFA. And I'll kick off with a little bit of MFA 101 just to make sure all of us are grounded in sort of the different approaches, the pros and cons of each approach. And then introduce this concept of how do you balance trust and friction, and then go into an overview of risk-based authentication. And we'll have some recommendations and takeaways at the end, and then open up for Q&A. So I first wanted to start with just maybe giving a brief introduction about myself. And let me see if the slide has moved forward here. Great, there's a little bit of a lag. So my focus at Auth0 is really I'm responsible for building all of the products and services that we deliver to our customers globally. And my team really obsesses on this idea of we want to provide seamless and secure experiences for your customers. Now that can be in the context of a consumer application, for example, or it could be in the context of empowering other businesses. So if you're a SaaS application and you're powering other businesses to use your product, and they may have users, it could be consumers or employees, that is sort of the area that we also focus on. And a little bit about myself, I've been sort of exposed to identity for a very, very long time. And in many of my roles, I was mostly a downstream user of identity information, either to do media or market research, or building Amazon's advertising business, or doing targeted TV advertising or email marketing, or building cloud-based identity solutions so that we can secure access for developers to cloud resources. So I've been sort of exposed to identity for a very long time. And so this fit at Auth0 was great because we were really focused on providing a platform to our customers so that they can authenticate, authorize, and provide secure access for applications, devices, and users. Just a little bit about Auth0. Like I mentioned, we're now a product unit of Okta. We were acquired earlier this year. And the company was founded in 2013 with this maniacal focus on making sure that we empower developers as they're building applications so that they can deliver these seamless experiences. We provide our solution across 21 different regions, across both AWS and Azure, and obviously have been growing really fast, both from sort of the number of unique identities that we touch all the way to the amount of logins that we process, and delivering all of those experiences with 4 nines or better for all of our enterprise customers. And I'm going to share a perspective of sort of our approach to this user first approach to MFA. It's because we've sort of worked with so many customers globally across verticals, across geographies, and across customer sizes. And so here you can see this this list of logos here. You can see that really authentication authorization is truly a universal problem, as most of you already know, given your roles. And so we provide our service and power probably a lot of logins that you are probably interacting with on a daily basis. Okay, so first let's tee up. Why would we even talk about MFA? And I think you've seen that the security breaches and sort of the cost of account takeover. This was research published earlier this year by Juniper Research. Is very costly. Has cost companies about $25.6 billion dollars alone in terms of the impact of these account takeovers. And you've probably seen headlines almost on a weekly or sometimes on a monthly basis on headlines such as XYZ company has had a data leak, has a security breach. And so it's fairly common for customers to have some type of a security or data breach where they're exposing customer information. So securing all of that information and access to all of that information is obviously critically important, especially to many of you in the roles that you're in today. So I want to start with just a little bit about, start with a 101 on MFA and multi-factor authentication, and then I'll walk you through how you balance the different competing forces and how we can deliver a user-first experience. So, when you think of sort of authentication factors, they sort of come in these 3 different flavors, right? So they're often based on knowledge, some information or knowledge about you. Password is a classic one, a PIN number, or some other personal information. We also know that it could be something that you possess. So we're all sort of attached to our mobile devices or a smart card, and so you can use that as a way to authenticate or verify who you are as a second factor. Or you can use sort of inherence, which is using like a biometrics identity, a fingerprint, or a speech pattern. Of course, our focus for this presentation is really going to be around possession, so something that you have. Like I said, typically this tends to be a mobile device, but could be some other physical card also that you could use for second factor. So let's start with the different factors that you can use or are available that you can use with your consumers today. So the first one is really starting with sort of SMS 2FA. As you all know that 99% of Americans have a phone, or North Americans have a phone capable of receiving text messages, right? So it's very easy from an onboarding perspective, very familiar. You're using text messages almost every few minutes for whatever reason. But there are some downsides to this, right? Sophisticated actors or hackers can use SS7 vulnerability. This is essentially the protocol that carriers use, and they can impersonate a carrier message and route specific messages to you. And then we also know that SIM swapping, where you can use social engineering or bribery to get your my SIM card, for example, sent to you. So SMS is really a super convenient method of two-factor authentication, but really not that secure. Let's take a look at a few other options. You can also do sort of time-based one-time passwords. And it's sort of a way to generate tokens based on an algorithm. And again, the inputs are a secret key and your system time. Those get put through a one-way function and out pops the truncated token. Now, symmetric key crypto offers increased security compared to SMS. But if someone gets access to the shared secret, then the method is very easily compromised. But as we all know, there are some advantages, right? So it offers offline access, and it's based on open standards. But unfortunately, obviously, it requires you to install an application, and you also have to worry about the expiration UX. So again, better, but there are some pros and cons to that as a second factor. So tends to be pretty good, but again, not perfect. There are some improvements there. Now let's take a look at push authentication. So push authentication was really popularized, as many of you know, by Duo Authenticator. And users love this because it's so low friction, right? You can essentially approve or deny a login request from your, like Apple Watch. It uses asymmetric key cryptography, which means that you have two keys, one that is only ever stored on the device. So you don't have to worry about leaking a shared secret, like with the TOTP or time-based one-time passcodes. And this is the only form of 2FA that adds the option to explicitly deny a login, right? Sometimes we sort of debate this internally, and sometimes we think that, unfortunately, it's so low friction that you could easily approve an authentication request just to get rid of it. And this has happened to me so many times, where if you're not paying attention, you may actually hit the wrong button. And so if someone is attempting an attack against you in the middle of the night, you might unintentionally approve the request. It also requires a special app like Authy or Duo, or you may use your own application. And similar to TOTP, getting users to download, again, requires you to download another app, and that can add a little bit of friction to your users. So, push authentication, it's convenient and secure, but sometimes maybe it's too convenient, might be too convenient. Now let's take a look at another type of authentication factor. So WebAuthn really is sort of the new hotness, and for good reason. It offers a high level of security with asymmetric key crypto like push authentication. But it's also based on an open standard like TOTP. The biggest drawbacks right now is that this is still relatively new and still going through this adoption curve, and setup can be clunky. You still need an authenticator that's compatible with the standard, and things like YubiKeys aren't cheap or reasonable to expect that every user of your application will have one. Of course, there are scenarios and in situation where you may do that, but it's but there is a cost associated with that. So if you look at sort of WebAuthn, it's secure, but not always convenient. And I think, and we believe that this will change. I think this, we're going through this adoption curve, and actually, as we have more and more devices that are able to support that, like our phones. We will continue to see a big uptake. If you're if you're working for a company and you're in the IT department, there's a good chance that you are handing out these physical tokens because they give you a level of security that the other methods do not offer quite readily. So let's take a look at some of the data. We published the state of secure identity last quarter, and sort of we were looking at sort of broad MFA adoption trends. And of course, it's no surprise that we see that time-based one-time passcodes, or TOTPs, that I've been referencing have widespread user adoption. And again, I think you can see why that is the case. Everybody has a phone. They're very easy to and very convenient to get customers to adopt this. The MFA factor of choice most widely utilized by users really varies drastically by industry. So in certain industries, such as media and retail, for example, SMS is the most preferred method because, again, you're trying to reduce the friction because you're probably in the middle of a transaction. You want to really make sure that you're able to capture that. And then if you go to other industries such as education and basic materials, it's like almost no SMS is used and in favor of TOTPs. So then, the likely question you're asking is like, okay, we have these different factors available, but which of these MFA factors or channels should you use? So we're going to walk through sort of what's some scenarios here that will help you think through how you would optimize your MFA strategy. But first, I think, typically sort of this choice or the strategy that you pick sort of is dependent on this long established understanding that the right channels really depends on your risk tolerance. So we've been told we had to choose between friction and risk. And so do I ensure security by adding friction, or do I improve the login user experience by taking more risk? And there is a good reason for that, right? Because low friction and low trust, well, you're taking on high risk. If you have high friction and low trust, well, that lowers your risk. So that's a low risk approach. And low friction and high trust obviously also lands you in a low risk scenario. So these trade-offs are super important, and you kind of have to think through how you would balance those. So again, we think, when you think of low friction, low trust is high risk, and high friction, low trust, lowers your risk. And obviously, if you can achieve low friction and operate with high trust, then you're also maintaining lower risk. And so really this missing dimension is risk, is trust. And that allows you to balance sort of the different competing forces such as friction. How much friction you want to introduce and how much risk you want to take. So, so let's start with how you essentially learn to trust, right? So you want to start with the highest acceptable friction level, and this can vary depending on use case. And I want to walk you through a few scenarios here. And then you really want to build risk models based on progressive assessment, right? And there are lots of different signals you can take a look at, and you can progressively assess whether a certain login has a higher risk or a lower risk. And you really want to demand higher assurance levels as your risk increases. So how is risk assessed? At least from our perspective, sort of there are three dimensions that we use, right? So we look at sort of new device. So we look at sort of, is a user signing in from a device that has not been used to access the account in the last 30 days. We also look at impossible travel. And so here we're trying to see if the user is signing in from a geolocation that would indicate an impossible travel scenario when compared to sort of the last time that they had logged in. And then the last one is really IP reputation. So is the user signing in from an IP address that is known to be associated with some type of suspicious behavior? So we combine all of these, and they combine really well to essentially create an overall risk score, which is used to determine whether to trigger adaptive MFA or AMFA, as we refer to internally. And these sort of built-in assessments sort of work together really, really well, or as part of a rule. So you can really customize how you want these three signals to sort of work together. So we give you some dials to essentially adjust how you would apply those. So let's get into a little bit more deeper into risk-based authentication. So like I had said, you're constantly balancing risk and trust. And so like I said, if you know that there was low friction and high trust, or the login has low risk, you would accept the login and allow the user to sign in. If there is medium risk, again, based on the type of risk score that you get, you can essentially trigger an MFA event, or essentially trigger a second factor. And then obviously, if a login is suspicious and comes with a high risk score, you can easily block access to that login. So, the trick is really how you go about finding your sweet spot, right? So I want to walk you through maybe a few examples here that will help you understand, well, depending on your application and scenario, you may have different tolerance levels. Let's just take maybe a very simple example in this case, which is, let's say you are a social app, you're building a social app, and there's a good chance that you're supporting your business teams or business stakeholders, and their goal really is to maximize the number of users that are signing up to your social application. And there's also a pretty good chance that we have a high risk for churn. So again, this is the balance where you do not want to introduce a lot of friction, because maybe acquiring users is already very hard, and just given the nature of the application, there is a high likelihood that they would churn. So in this particular scenario, you may say, well, SMS OTP for login only if there is an extreme risk, or your risk scores are extremely high, right? So this is like a nice way to balance where you would introduce SMS OTP. Let's take maybe a different example. So let's say you are an app that's providing some type of digital or mobile health services, right? And here, maybe your user base is probably not as tech savvy, right? So compared to the last example where you're trying to get users to sign up for a social app, it's a pretty good chance that the audience that's essentially that you're targeting for this digital health services or mobile health services may vary from the users that you're trying to attract for your social app. And so here, your users are less tech savvy. And in this scenario, like, data privacy is a really, really big concern, right? So you're probably dealing with lots of regulations related to health data. And so the information that you're protecting here obviously is quite valuable to the user, and probably in the context of what the app is doing might also be extremely valuable to your company. So here again, you think through the different balancing the different elements of friction, risk, and trust. Here, you may essentially do SMS OTP for logins, but you may actually also add biometrics to access any personal health information, right? So again, you really want to make sure that maybe here your trust levels, you may add a little more friction here, especially if you think that the login is suspicious. Adding biometrics protects you, but also gives the user the protection that they need, given the type of information that's being exposed. And then let's take maybe another example, which is very, very different than the first two that we talked about. So let's take maybe, this is trending right now. Let's say you're a crypto exchange, you are a hot startup that's doing some very interesting work with coins or tokens. And your user base is actually very different here, right? They're extremely tech savvy, very, very knowledgeable, most likely developers. And your risk profile is different here. It's essentially theft. And losses might be like a big concern. You don't want to lose all your valuable crypto assets since they just keep going up to the right. So different sort of consideration here again. You might take a different approach here where you say, okay, look, there is trust. My appetite for risk, not too high. I don't care if this adds friction to the end user, but I really want to make sure that that the end user is exactly who they say they are, because there's a really big consequence of not getting this right. So here again, you may essentially do SMS OTP for initial login. You may even add biometrics, right? And this is fairly common if you're using some of these financial apps or trading apps. You see that they're all adding additional friction to verify who you are. And you may even push for secure customer authentication, push for transactions, right? So you may even take it beyond just the initial login and say, well, every transaction that you make on this platform may also require you to essentially validate that you're transferring the amount of money, you made a large transaction or purchase or sale. Confirm that you actually intended to do that, because the exposure to your financial losses could be pretty significant. So you can see in all these three scenarios, right? You are essentially, you can take these risk scores that you're getting from a provider like us or others, and you essentially are able to balance those competing factors depending on who your user base is and what and what the top concern that you're trying to solve for is, right? So you can balance those. You can balance those out. So, wanted to sort of share maybe a little bit behind or under the hood here in terms of this risk-based authentication engine or risk-based authentication concept that we've built. Is that conceptually what you see here on the diagram above, sort of exists on our platform today. The way we enable this is essentially through our different extensibility triggers. Customers leverage Auth0 to verify if each session clears the required session strength, if you will, of each stage on the journey. So here, the example that you were seeing above illustrates a case where a known customer tries to sign up from a different location and device, raising the required session strength, right? In this case, we may need to, meaning they may need to clear a CAPTCHA, for example, before the user can continue. And so this is just one example, right? We're essentially working on leveraging all of those login volume that I talked about earlier that we see, and we dynamically adjust each customer's user session strength according to the changes in these data patterns. We also obviously rely on third-party threat intel to also inform this. But as you all know, attackers move really, really fast. And now that we have this massive global presence, we can essentially start leveraging this data at much larger scale and with machine learning to essentially process all of these various signals that we're seeing and verify if the login that you have is suspicious or not. And so, we can also look at things like verifying SAML tokens and things like that, and essentially even add token fraud as another signal. Now we've had this feature out to our customers for a while, and I kind of wanted to share, maybe illustrate sort of the impact of this type of implementation of adaptive MFA versus sort of always-on MFA, right? So to illustrate more clearly how these risk-based adaptive MFA can impact your customer's experience or the user experience, let's take a look at login numbers both with and without adaptive MFA. So here on the screen, you can see there are 4 different lines here. There's always on MFA login failure, adaptive MFA login failure, and then you can see always on MFA login success and adaptive MFA login success. And so, when we look at sort of, this is looking at anonymized customer data over the last 30 days, and you can see by implementing adaptive MFA versus always on, we're seeing that there are 80% fewer challenges for successful logins, right? So again, taking those risk scores and configuring when you challenge the logins. And then what we're also seeing is that, there are 90% fewer failed logins, right? So again, think about this from a customer perspective. And also in some cases, depending on the use case, you may also have a big support team or a support infrastructure behind it that can also be impacted when you have lots of failed logins. So adaptive MFA, when done right, obviously can be really powerful. So just to sort of bring it sort of all together and wrapping up, and I want to get to questions, is that you don't really have to be stuck in the old ways of constantly adding friction and having to balance that need with the business. We believe with this adaptive MFA, you can really figure out when you want to add friction and when you use the signals that help you understand if a certain login is trustworthy or not, can really help you drive the right business outcomes. And there's a good chance that many of you have your business stakeholders who are really worried about churn or losing users. Obviously, there's a security risk, which you obviously own around breach and losses, but also think of all the positive impact that you can have to the business in terms of improving acquisition or improving conversion rates. So doing a quick time check. Yep, we have about 10 minutes. So let me wrap this last section up here, and then we can open up for questions that you may have. So, a couple of things that you want to consider before you challenge your users, right? You want to think through what is your risk threshold. You really want to only require multi-factor authentication in low trust scenarios. In some of the examples that I walked you through, we also looked at, who are your users and a little bit about how savvy they are, right? And so that may inform the type of a second factor choice that you may implement. And you really want to think through, you want to really demand higher assurance levels as risk level increases, right? So trust is not like just a binary thing. You're constantly looking at the different risk scores, whether it's coming from a provider like us or combining your own internal scores. You really want to make sure that you're constantly adopting that and making sure that you are really sure that that a certain login is risky versus not. So with that, I hope this was helpful in giving you some insights on how to balance these different competing factors. And we can now open up for questions. I want to leave a good time for questions at the end. So let's see. I'm going to switch over to my chat window here. So I see there are two comments or questions here. The first one is, what about passwordless authentication? Yes, I didn't cover that. That's a good point. That's another sort of factor that you can also use, and so that's also very much valid. But again, even with password authentication, we are seeing these different levels of adoption, and also may depend on your use case and end user. The next question here, I'm going to read it just so everybody has context of what the question is. What is the role of interface design in MFA? What are the biggest challenges related to that? This is a really good question. So I think when you're considering implementing your multi-factor authentication strategy, I think it's really important to make sure you get your interface design right. From our perspective, at least what we hear from customers is they're often asking us to give them the capability so they can completely customize the branding experience, of course. And we often give them visual tools also to figure out, what are the different journeys that their customers are going to go through. So like we're working on visual design tools or sort of low code or no code tools, where our customers can visually design an entire login flow, which obviously includes the scenarios where you would essentially challenge a login or block a login and the like. And so I think interface design is really important. A lot of people think it's just a login box, you don't have to worry about it, and I think that's the big caution here. The login box, when it works, when it's simple and straightforward, obviously, it's hidden after you log in. But I think there is a lot that you have to get right for that to happen. And so I think it's super important to make sure your flows have been thought through, because the downstream impact could be pretty significant to your business or to your security risk profile. The next question here I have is, with the range of developing cybersecurity technology, what can be the next direction the MFA technology will be moving towards? Well, I think we're going to see one trend that at least we're observing is that, you're going to be, just based on the amount of data and signals that was, for example, that we're observing, I think over time, and especially as customers implement these solutions and get comfortable with what these risk scores mean for their business, I think you will see data play a very big role in helping our customers or security professionals understand whether a login is suspicious or not. And so I think that is going to help quite a bit. The second thing is I do think the adoption for MFA is still pretty low. I think the last time I checked, it was still in low digits, like 10 to 20%, I believe, is still the adoption rate. And so I think we're going to see a big uptake in adoption. And once it becomes really part of your user experience, you can introduce additional technologies that don't require you to essentially authenticate yourself. And then in terms of is there any new technology that will be breakthrough? I mean, I think there are a few interesting things on the horizon, but it's really hard to predict when these will take off, because even for something like the current MFA factors that we have, there's still quite a bit of room for adoption to continue to grow. The next question here is, how do you feel about biometrics and MFA? Is it more of a privacy concern than it's worth for an organization? That's a really good question. I actually did look at some data recently that was published in a few studies. I think there is a privacy concern for certain users, but not a lot. Like, I think if you look at North America, I think at least 40 to 50% of consumers were actually okay with using biometrics as a second factor. I think a big thing here is these platforms are going to play a much bigger role in educating consumers about safety and privacy. And so I think one example here, for example, I think Apple has done a fairly good job and going at great lengths to explain why their face technologies or Face ID and the like is secure by doing everything on device and not sending that information back to a centralized server. So I do think, if those privacy concerns exist, I think the platforms will alleviate a lot of that. All right, a few more minutes to go here. I think there is one more question here, which is, what is your point of view on changing landscape of passwordless login? Are there chances it can make MFA tech obsolete? I get this question often. I don't know. I mean, I think I think MFA technology is going to be around. And I say that simply because of the adoption trends we have seen, and it also varies by industry and your level of sort of tolerance and balancing all of these different factors. So I think MFA technology is going to be around for a while. It's harder to predict when true passwordless will just be completely ubiquitous and around us. I think we've all been claiming the death of the password for a while, and it hasn't happened yet. And so I think we will see a gradual shift over the next 3 to 5 years, but it's really hard to predict when it will happen and what the landscape will look like, and what the leading or pervasive passwordless technology will be. I think we'll live in this a period where we're supporting different technologies, and you'll see different adoption curves, and they'll vary by customers and use cases. So at least from our perspective, we think we have to support all of these different mechanisms that exist, because we also see a lot of our customers in this sort of, when they set this up, a lot of them, they just want to set it and forget it, right? Like, you don't want to touch your login infrastructure. And so that's another sort of, can be a barrier to implementing a lot of these things. Cool. So with that, I think we are right at time. Wanted to thank everybody for the questions, and I hope some part of this session was helpful in helping you navigate how you decide on your MFA strategy. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the day and a good rest of the day 3, which is tomorrow. Thank you.